Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Inside Grants What Federal Monitors Are Actually Looking For. While you're sweating, getting ready to get a review, hopefully, Aaron and myself can help you a little bit on this and calm any nerves you might have. But glad you're joining us. Hopefully, it's not super hot where you're at. I'm here in right outside Raleigh, North Carolina. It's almost 90 degrees. It's too hot. It's too hot, people. It's too hot already. But I'm in the air conditioning right now, so I'm all right. But we are glad you are here. Put in the chat where you're from. Would love to know. We hopefully are going to keep you for about 40, 50 minutes today and then give you some time back to your day. But we are glad you are here. But we're going to go ahead and get started. And a little bit about us. If you've never been to one of our webinars, we were established in 2020 to help organizations navigate the federal grants landscape. We are a bunch of feds, former feds, I should say, that did federal grant work at the federal level. Some of us have grantee work, like myself as well, and some folks have just been feds their whole life. And what's cool about today's webinar is that Aaron and myself have both been feds who have done federal grant compliance work. We were the ones that knocked on your door and came and wrote the report and looked at all your files. So this is coming straight from the horse's mouth, per se, today. We are super excited. So, again, my name is Dave Wickstrom. I own Team DWC, and Aaron Taylor here is a colleague, senior consultant. Most recently was at HHS, ACL, and HUD. So, and there was an audit liaison for HUD. And so when you had audit findings, you got to talk to Aaron. And actually would have been a good person to talk to. I've seen some of the audit liaison folks. Sometimes they're not nice people. Aaron's nice. That's why he works here. So, but we'll go ahead and get started a little bit. And what we want to talk about as we are talking about, you're getting a review. Where the federal monitors are going to focus is going to be the uniform guidance, right? And specifically, they're going to be in the back half of the uniform guidance. Post-award requirements is where they're going to spend most of their time, right? Cost principles, what is and is not allowable, audit requirements, and any other post-award, making sure that you've got all of your reports in, all those requirements that are there. They were in on time, they were accurate. So that's where when the feds come in, they're going to be looking at that back half, and we're going to talk to you a little bit more. Before we get going, though, we're going to talk a little bit about 2 CFR 200. That is the uniform guidance. You probably heard about it. Aaron is going to put the links in the chat as well, so you will have those. Encourage you. These are the two things you need to keep. This is what you'll see. 2 CFR 200 is the rules that your federal grant will be judged by. In previous lifetimes, HHS had a separate one, but they have now moved to 2 CFR 200 as well. So if you're a nonprofit, 2 CFR 200 is where you're going to be. If you're a for-profit, more than likely you're going to be in the FAR. But if you're a hospital, there's some other requirements. You might be somewhere. But for the good majority of everybody here, 2 CFR 200 is where you're going to need to go. Now, if you Google it, you're going to get a ton of different sites. The sites that we gave you in the chat are the ones updated by the federal government. That's where you need to live. Okay, I would bookmark that. You're going to see the search at the top left, top right, and in the middle. Do not use those. I know that sounds crazy to say, but don't use those. Those search every CFR, every code of federal regulation in federal government world. Don't do that. That will be super confusing for you. Instead, do a control F or a control find whatever that is. If you're on a Mac, it's Command F, I believe. Control F maybe on a word. I don't know. It's all different, uh, but that will search that full page if you're looking for key terms. Also, the table of contents is going to be your best friend, kind of knowing where things are at. And if you're not very familiar, we'll have something just kind of going over 2 CFR 200 in the near future. So we'd love for you to join that. But let's talk a little bit about where in 2 CFR 200 you're going to be. And that is subpart D, subpart E, and subpart F. Okay? Subpart D is going to be talking about, if you're a grantee, what your financial management, internal controls, what they need to look like. Okay? You're also going to find out when you get paid, how do you get paid? And you should minimize the time between drawdown and the expenditure of the fund, meaning you need to minimize. You don't draw it down and spend it 6 months later. When you draw down that money needs to go out, right? The check needs to be written pretty close to it, right? Let's talk about if you have budget revisions, how do you handle that? What does it look for closeout? All of those things will be things that the feds will be looking for. The cost principle, subpart E, is where everybody loves to talk and to live. And the answer is, and we get a lot of questions here about it, is it depends. We even got new stickers. We got a bunch of new stickers, and they just say it depends because we say it all the time. It depends. It all depends on the scenario, the situation surrounding that cost. And when you look at subpart E of 2 CFR 200, 420 through 476 specifically, the majority of costs you're going to have are talked about there. And it will give you kind of scenarios that make things allowable or unallowable. And then it's on you. The burden of proof is on you to show if it is allowable or not allowable. And then subpart F is also talking about, is a single audit required or not required? And what goes into it? The auditors know subpart F forwards and backwards. It's a lot about how they do their job. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. All right. So let's go to the next slide here, Aaron. How do we, as feds, select grantees for monitoring an event that we come either remotely or on site? How does that happen? Well, it depends. It really does. And it depends because there could be a multitude of reasons. It could just be, hey, you haven't been reviewed in a while and you're a high risk because of how much money you get, right? Or how many sub-recipients you have. There's nothing bad you've done, right? It could be during a review of your PPR that you have every year that they have some concerns and they have to go out so many places. I know when I was at HHS and ACL that there was a requirement for us to go out to so many agencies a year. So at the end of the day, you're gonna draw the short stick. You're gonna get picked. It could be people having a lot of concerns about your agency, and so that could play a part in it. Maybe the administration, they tell us where to go. There's not a lot when your boss is saying, you're going there. Okay, we're going there, right? And so political appointees might have a certain area that they want to focus in on. And so that might be the focus, right? So, and maybe it is a review is maybe because you're doing such a good job, we want to learn more about it. And so we're told from the higher ups, hey, go learn more about it. Go do a review, but we want you to learn more about this work they're doing and how we can push it forward to the whole network across the country. And so as we're going through this, I don't want you to think just because you're getting a review, it's bad. A lot of the times it's good. What we tried to do at the federal level is when programs get funded, I want you to think about this. The members of Congress have staffers that literally know nothing about our programs. And one of the things they'll look at is all of these reports that we write about when we go out and do monitoring. So if all of them are bad, That doesn't look good for the program moving forward. So you kind of have to sandwich a bad one that we know is going to be bad with two good ones, right? Maybe three good ones if it's going to be real bad, because perception is reality in DC. And so if all they see is bad, then yeah, you might not get funded or the funding might get reduced. Who knows? But these are all things that people think about as we're doing it, right? You can't just go after only the bad ones. So yes, you're doing everything right. You still might get reviewed. And I just told you a reason why. So I'm going to turn it over to Aaron for the next few slides. I'll be back towards the end. But Aaron Taylor, it's all yours, my man.
Thank you so much, Dave. This is a topic I get really excited about, and particularly since I came to DWC, I've gotten super excited about because I have an opportunity to speak real with grantees and tell them about the monitoring of process, really explain how to get ready, how to prepare, and how to do it well. One thing we notice a lot is that grantees, in my federal experience, would have compliance issues or findings because of an unwillingness to ask questions or a misunderstanding about what a federal monitor is asking for. So this is an opportunity to be fully transparent with how the process is done, to give you all that insider edge because we're insider grants, and to give you an opportunity to really absorb and ask questions at the end that have been sitting with you. So when we look at monitoring, and we'll call it a monitoring event, there's possibilities of place it could happen and the scope. These things are often decided by based on those risks that Dave just talked about, right? Risk usually drive the intensity of the review, whether it's fully comprehensive, programmatic, administrative, and financial, or targeted to isolated issues. Um, Risk will often drive if something is happening on site, but other factors that can contribute to on site would include the scope and the type of work you're doing, and whether having a physical location is really important because you have clients or individuals that are coming into the building to get services, right? So when developing the monitoring, the federal officials thinking about this and thinking about time, risk, money available, staffing, capacity to formulate where they're going to do the monitoring and how they're going to do it. Once you get a notification saying that monitoring is going to happen, make sure that it lists out where the venue is, how it's going to happen, because if people are coming on site, you need to think about scheduling and space availability, and make sure that they clearly outline the scope. So you know from your side who needs to be involved, what is going to be the extent of the review, and how you can focus and prepare and get ready. If you've never heard of a targeted review, this is something I did a lot when I had my 3 years at ACO. Targeted reviews were often the result of having a specific complaint. Maybe we received a citizen complaint about the grantee, and we needed first to do a merit determination to see if there was need for further review, see if the complaint had merit. Also, it could be to investigate a specific defect. Maybe that, as Dave mentioned, your performance report had issues, or there's concerns or questions, or your financial report was late or delinquent, or had missing data, or the data just doesn't make sense. It could be to conduct follow-up on a single audit finding to make sure that you're actually implementing the changes were required by the auditor, or it could be to test your understanding or compliance with a specific statute or regulation. Two examples of doing this at HHS ACL. I led a broad review of DD councils to understand, to assess their understanding of the match requirement under the DD Act, so we could write better policy and set, better technical assistance for those organizations so they could be successful. We also did the same thing for protection and advocacy systems around the DD Act program income requirement, because these were really unique and challenging requirements. The policies and processes at the agency level were not great, and grantees were generally struggling to comply with the work. So it was an opportunity to learn where the struggles are and to produce better products to ensure better compliance in the long run. One thing to note is that if you do have a targeted review and the federal officials identify further risk or concerns during their review, they might upgrade the review to a comprehensive to allow the opportunity to expand the scope to review more parts of your organization or more parts of the grant award. If this happens, make sure you ask why they're doing it so you understand the changing scope, and ask for a written document explaining the change in scope and justification. Generally, monitoring follows 5 or 6 core steps, right? You will receive a notification. This is either in old school days, it's a written letter delivered to the executive director of your organization. More likely now, it is a signed PDF delivered as an email attachment. This tells you that a monitoring is going to happen with specific dates, scope, who's going to be involved, and all the good introductory stuff. Any good federal official will launch a monitoring event or monitoring with a kickoff meeting where there's an opportunity to go over verbally the scope of the monitoring, why it's being done, who's involved, in the schedule of monitoring event activities, including review of documentation, on-site work and visits, or interviews. Once all the initial review work is done, there should be an exit meeting or exit conference to close out the active review stage of the monitoring. This is when there'll be an opportunity for the federal official to give a summary of their review and any early conclusions, and for them to ask additional questions and grant you to provide feedback. When I was a federal official working in multiple agencies, I would always try to provide a summary set of conclusions of the exit conference and forewarn a grantee if there were concerns of noncompliance, right? Usually a federal official does not have findings fully formed at an exit conference because they have to go back and talk to their leadership and the bureaucracy and the OGC in order to make official and final findings. But I would encourage you, from the grantee side, to prod them if there are any concerns of noncompliance. Because if you're looking to resolve noncompliance before it becomes a finding, this is your best opportunity. Once it gets into a formalized report, like stage 5, the draft report, or into the final report, and the findings are there written, it's going to be a lot harder to get them off the paper. And once you have a finding, then you're going to have to move into corrective action phase to develop a corrective action plan and to resolve the findings, right? And we all know findings take a lot of time away from the programmatic work you want to do. Generally why everyone's in the business of being a grantee, which is to help individuals and to improve the community. Remember, with findings, a lot of times they come as policy issues, programmatic processes, outputs, but you also could owe money. All right. So that's the biggest and scariest thing about monitoring, is that the federal government could say that you're non-compliant and owe funds. So again, I can't emphasize enough, and I used to do a lot of TA to grantees, that if you're confused, if you have questions, reach out in stages 1, 2, or 3 to clarify the compliance standard, to clarify questions, to make sure that you're delivering your best response as early as possible, so findings aren't developed based on misunderstandings. I did monitoring at HUD, at SBA, at NIH, and then on HHS and ACL. I've done on-site, hybrid, virtual, targeted, and comprehensive reviews. Federal officials, in my experience in training, should approach monitoring from a 3-prong approach. The first one's compliance, and that's the one that everyone's scared about, right? Am I complying with all the award terms and conditions, the program requirements, the statute, the regulation? It's right to be fearful about compliance, and it makes sense to be fearful about compliance, but monitoring is not just about compliance. From a federal official side, it's also about learning, right? Dave talked about the opportunity to learn about innovative and collaborative and high impact work. It's an opportunity to learn about a grantee's understanding of programmatic requirements. It's an opportunity to learn how a grantee functions, particularly if they've had an operational or staffing change. And then to provide technical assistance. Um, One of the hardest things about being a federal official in the past is that you had very few opportunities to talk with grantees and to have good, genuine conversation. Monitoring gives that opportunity so that conversations aren't cut off by emails and what's in between the lines, or it's not cut off because you just had 30 minutes for a check-in once a quarter. This is an opportunity to really sit down and explore programs, think about operational setup and internal controls. I've had some wonderful and great collaborative discussions um, and always been able to accomplish all three prongs. I put it in on this slide because I want to make it a reminder over and over again. I spent a lot of work, a lot of time doing Office of Inspector General Audit Liaison work. So working specifically with grantees after findings were made by the IG. And so many of those findings came as a result of misunderstandings or sending the wrong documentation to the IG or potentially the IG using the wrong compliance standard. And you'd have to spend double or triple the amount of time during the corrective action phase after the report had been issued, trying to resolve something that could have been simply dealt with on the front end. So if there are misunderstandings, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask the federal officials. Don't assume that asking questions is going to be a sign that you don't understand or that you're bad, right? Take it from the perspective of being inquisitive and also potentially challenging the federal official, test their knowledge, see how good they are at actually doing this work. And I think you'll put yourself in a much better position. So let's get inside the head of a federal official. When I was doing monitoring across multiple federal agencies, I generally had 5 key focus areas: policies, processes, systems, controls, and impacts. I'm generally known as someone who's really focused on financial management and internal controls and operations. So I spend a lot of my time, particularly now at DWC, and working with grantees on the first 4 components. But I spent almost a decade at HUD working grant programs, programmatic, fiscal, and administrative sides, nuts to bolts, cradle to grave. So whenever I think about cost allowability and the use of federal funds, I always start with number 5, which is impacts. Are you doing the programmatic work? Are you conducting eligible activities? Is the way in which you're spending money resulting in the outputs and outcomes that you are required to achieve, right? That you said that you would deliver in your application. You'll see as we walk through each of these that there's tons of crossover and lots of connection. And it's usually in that connection between these different focus areas that there's breakdowns. And that's where we start to get into findings, and we'll unpack that a little bit more. So policies. On the slide, I identified several areas of the uniform guidance where it specifically talks about the need for policies. I use the word a lot in monitoring: codification, right? One of our biggest concerns when we go to see a grantee, if you're a federal official, is that someone will talk you through an amazing policy and process, and they've got all the verbal game done in the interview, and then you go to look at the documents and they haven't written anything down. Or the last time they reviewed the document and made updates was a decade ago. And a decade ago, we'll say 12 years ago, we didn't have the uniform guidance. We were still in the OMB circulars. You'll see these outdated references, and that brings a lot of concerns that processes aren't going to be consistent, that there are not good internal controls, and that there's inadequate checks and balances, which lead to work not being done properly, potentially unallowable cost, and poor delivery of the outputs and outcomes, right? The whole reason that you got the federal money. So when we look at policies as a federal official, and when I do it from the standpoint of DWC and I'm providing technical assistance or support or monitoring readiness to a grantee, I'm going to look, are they comprehensive and up to date? If you've made revisions, do you have a catalog of that? And do you say what revisions were made? Are you properly framing all aspects of your organization? The administrative, the executive side, the programmatic side, and fiscal functions? Do you understand what the compliance requirements are for your different revenue streams, your different grant awards? If there's deviations or process changes or unique requirements that are different from your standard operating procedures, have you identified them and indicated how your organization is going to set policies to modify process to meet a statutory requirement or a programmatic requirement? Is the way in which you set up policies appropriate for your organization? I've seen amazing Cadillac, Mercedes, BMW policies that look like AI did a wonderful job, or they brought a consultant in and they gave them the master platinum template. But they don't fit the organization because it's a nonprofit with 7 people. And this is a policy built for a 50-person nonprofit. Always think about fitting the size and shape, who you are as an organization, what your structure is from a management standpoint. And then last, internal controls. We're going to talk about internal controls a lot, or checks and balances. Make sure you clearly outline checks and balances and that they're evenly distributed across appropriate management individuals. Okay. So processes, you have policies, you set standards written out. A lot of times, grantees or organizations will have supplemental documents, right, that outline processes. And this is how people actually do the work, right? Who's responsible for it, where it takes place, and when it's going to take place, right? So when we're talking about a federal award, in order to comply with federal award term and conditions, you need to know all the requirements of that award. So what's the timeline or period of performance? What's the budget? What are the unique restrictions? When are reports due? You have to set all those markers in place, and you have to have processes to fit that. What system do I have to go in to submit the report? What users? Who's going to be involved? What are the steps? What are the frequencies? What are the additional documentation I need, right? Where we start to see issues as federal officials and looking at this is there's a lack of consistency between policy, the standard, and the process. Or there's not a clear explanation of deviations or modifications. You haven't outlined a record standard. Is it digital? Is it paper? How's it stored? How are individuals trained to do the work? And overarching, do your processes actually to preserve your internal controls? Is there good alignment and consistency with it? Is it reinforcing what you've outlined as your standard checks and balances? Moving on to systems, I briefly talked about the systems that your funder has. You need to have access to those systems. You need to have guides to explain what you're doing in those systems, and you need to identify the users who are actually going to have accounts. For example, when we were at ACL and HHS, getting access to the payment management system to draw down funds and to submit federal financial reports took a long time because there were new verification mechanisms in place. A lot of the grantees I work with only had a single user, which was the executive director. And if that person got sick or they left the organization, they were left scrambling to get a new user account in place. So think about having backups in play. Then we go to internal systems. There's all sorts of systems that you utilize to manage the grant funds, and federal officials are going to look at all applicable systems. They're going to look at your accounting system to see that you properly budget and allocate funds. They're going to look at your general ledger, your profit and loss statement, your statement of activity. Payroll, paying salaries is often a huge budget line item in federal grant awards, and they're going to look at the connectivity. They're going to look at your cost allocation plan, how timekeeping and staff activities are tracked and reviewed by management, and how this results in actual payroll and distribution of expenses to awards. There's often programmatic tracking systems. You have systems or spreadsheets to manage property and equipment, and you likely have some sort of document or maybe management software to track phasing and timeline. All of these components and systems that are used in federal awards need to have supporting policies and processes, and they need to have the ability to manage records to show what has actually been done with the award expenses and to demonstrate that you consistently follow your processes, that you align with your cost allocation plan, and you're actually following your budget and doing reconciliations. If you charge these systems to the awards, they need to be appropriately expensed, and they need to be maintained. And as we come back to it over and over again, they need to reinforce your internal controls. So we finally got into controls. Controls generally refer to internal controls or 2 CFR 200-303, and the synonym is checks and balances, right? Internal controls were mentioned over and over again across the first 3 slides: policy, process, and systems. You set standards for internal controls and policies. You show them in practice in your processes. They're innate parts of your systems because you have checks and balances and different approval steps and metadata. And then generally, controls is how we look at the enterprise. A lot of times it's human capital. Who are the grant staffs that are assuming oversight responsibilities? Who are the managers? Who are the expense approvers? Are there the adequate systems in place? And are the internal controls clearly displayed in those systems? A lot of times we see internal control defects because staff don't understand the policy or process, or they don't receive appropriate training, and or staff doesn't understand the award requirements and potentially how they have to modify the way they do work in order to align with a statute or program-specific compliance measure. Another potential inconsistent we see resulting in internal control issues is job descriptions that either are not updated or are poorly defined. One thing that I challenge grantees to do when I work with them in a technical assistance or support approach is to really look through their policy documents, to tease out when they name a position, and to make a bulleted list of their responsibilities. Then use that as an outline in developing updates to the policy, and always make sure you reconcile that back to the position description. Many times, nonprofits and grantees can think about organizations from the standpoint of an individual, particularly if they've been there a long time and they've worn a bunch of hats, instead of looking at operations and controls and processes from the standpoint of a position. Ultimately, for good succession planning and for good overarching operational system, you need to look at it from the standpoint of a position and not an individual, because that's where you'll start to see where there's gaps in your internal controls and checks and balances, and where you have vulnerabilities and risk that could lead to non-compliance. And I'll say most often it's internal control defects that lead to non-compliance in the version of unallowable cost, right? And unallowable cost, if they're proven unallowable by the federal agency, equal repayment, right? And this is repayment with non-federal funds, from your general reserves, or it could be potentially repayment through the form of a reduction of future awards. So tying it all together, the 5th focus area is impacts, right? And impacts are at the core of all 4 of the other focus areas, and it's the reason why you get grant awards. You get grant awards to deliver programmatic goals, to produce outputs and outcomes. So when you have a federal official come to monitor you, you need to be able to clearly answer these questions. What is the purpose of the grant funds? Why did I get these? You wrote an application potentially for this, saying that you need them, that you're good, that you're awesome at doing this work, and you're going to deliver. Be able to tell the federal official what you achieved clearly, right? In writing, verbally, and show them dashboards, show them data, show them outputs. Explain that you're on track to do the work in the timeline you said you would, or within the period of performance of the award. And if you're not, what you're doing to get yourself back on track. If there were changes in your budget or modifications, be ready to talk about those. Ideally, you would have already had this discussion with the federal official during normal grant management or monitoring work, but be ready to bring it up again and say, hey, when I reached out to you about this, this is what happened. And now we're all the way here, which is back on the straight path, nailing it on your award. And the last piece is I use this word stewardship a lot, right? Because when we receive federal funds, we're stewards of federal funds. Show that you're a great steward. Show that I received an award. I'm delivering on the goals and outputs and outcomes that I said I would, and I'm doing it in a way that's cost efficient and in compliance with all award terms and conditions. The monitoring event is over, and there's generally two pathways you fall once you get that final report. The first pathway is that you're clean. It's a celebration report like Dave talked about. We want to have celebration reports to identify all the great things that grantees have done and show that there's no concerns, there's no fraud, waste, and abuse. Nobody needs to come and investigate this. If they are, they're coming to see how awesome you are. Pathway two is the other side, so that they're findings. And I generally talk about soft and heavy findings or policy and cost findings. If you have findings, there's going to be a corrective action plan. So you're going to have to outline what you're going to do to resolve the finding and how long it's going to take to do that. If there is a cost finding, you'll get a last chance to resolve the unallowable cost. If you're unable to resolve that, so prove that you did use the money eligibly or allowably, then you're going to have to repay. And that corrective action plan is going to stay open until repayment is satisfied in full. You don't want to be on pathway two. So Dave is going to come back after this slide and talk to you about how to get monitoring ready and how DWC can partner with you on that. As I lead out on my last slide, I just wanted to provide some sample grant monitoring resources. We post all of our PowerPoints onto the Inside Grants website, and these links will be active. And these are things that you can go to real federal programs, to real federal sites, where they outline more transparently how they do monitoring, what resources they use, and what checklists are in play. Dave and I work a lot in the IL field or independent living coming from ACL because we had a lot of experience working with SILs, and Dave led ACL. ACL IL has comp resources, their monitoring resources that go through how they do monitoring. And they also have past reports. So you can see how the federal officials conducted the review, who was involved, what way they did it, and what the results were. I spent 10 years at HUD and Community Planning and Development. Community Planning and Development gives out CDBG and home and affordable housing and homeless and disaster recovery funds. They have a wonderful workbook that outlines chapters for every single program and then the accompanying exhibits. So these are all the questions that federal officials are actually using when they conduct the reviews. I also went to ED's Rehabilitation Services Administration, and they have a hub that looks like it has helpful materials as well. This gives you a better window into how federal officials are actually doing the work and potentially what tools and resources they're using, so you can position your organization as a grantee to be more monitoring ready. So I'm all done. I'm going to hand it back over to Dave, and he's going to take us home.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that. Hopefully you all learned some things. One of the things I want to talk about is how do you get ready? As Aaron said, I led a Center for Independent Living that was federally funded in Raleigh, North Carolina, before I went to become a Fed. And so how do you get monitoring ready? And that's to me, one of the best practices you can do is to be ready and do it every year. Have a mock review. Have another agency that's like you sign non-disclosures, do whatever you got to do, and then you monitor each other, learn from each other, right? Also prepare all the documents you're going to need to have. There's probably a list that you're going to see. One of them will probably be your 501c3 letter. You're going to need to have your grant awards. You're going to need to have all these documents. Every year, make copies of them and either put them on a drive or put them in a 3-ring binder and have them on a shelf. Just be ready to go. Don't start looking for these documents when you get a phone call or an email that says, hey, we're going to review you. Already make this an annual thing. You take 2 to 3 days, and all you do on your calendar is get ready for a review. Just like if you were having one in real life. And when you get that email or that phone call, you're ready. You already have everything. One of the best things you can do, too, to really prevent any type of kind of review that they have a lot of questions is when you draw down money, have a document where you print off from PMS or ASAP or whatever you draw down money from. Have a printout of how much you drew down. And if you're the executive director or CEO, sign that, date it, and behind it, have all the backup documentation with it. Scan that in as one PDF and put it in a folder, right? And then if Aaron contacts you and said, hey, your drawdown on April 1st, we need backup documentation for it. You know what? You have it. It's already ready to go. 5 minutes, and he's got it in his email box as a PDF. As former Feds, Aaron will agree with this as well. We loved it. The longer you take to find things, the more goes through our head about what's happening. Are you creating documents? Are you creating some type of documentation trail that you don't have? What's taking so long? This should not take very long to get backup documentation if you build in a system that does it on the front end. We often say here, every system is perfectly designed to achieve exactly the results it gets. Every system is perfectly designed to achieve exactly the results it gets. So think about that and make some changes potentially, right? Think through these. Talk to the Feds. Read those reports. You're getting monitoring ready. Are some of these issues that what you have? What is their corrective action plan? Go ahead and start doing that, right? And yes, if they're looking at a prior year where you had issues, but you've already identified them and you've already made the changes, there's a lot of wiggle room for Fed employees and reviewers to say, oh, well, this is already taken care of. Why are we going to go after it again? Right? The change has already been made. We love to see improvement. So make sure that you are doing that. You can show it. You're documenting, hey, we did our own review. We found this issue by reading this report, and we went to go look at ours, and we had issues, so we changed. Great. That's what they want to see. So a lot of simple things you can do to get ready. How can we help? One of the cooler things we can do is Aaron has really been kind of taking this by the horns, is our financial management risk review scorecard. And so we are going to go through and really look at where your processes can improve on the financial side, making sure you're kind of in line, and we give you a scorecard of where you're at and in some practical ways that you can make some changes so you are confident when you get that review, because it's not an if, it's a when. Okay. And so when they call, you're going to get a review, you're ready to go. And so that's one of the biggest things. We just started that in the past few months. And so would love, it's pretty cheap option, unless you're like a $1 billion agency. It's a little bit more expensive. We got a little bit more work to do, but feel free to reach out to us about that. If you have a review coming, we can be in the background helping and supporting you as well. Okay, so you're not by yourself. We can be on a call, and we can help you say, hey, don't say some things and say some things, right? If they ask a question in a review, answer the question. We loved as Fed silence because you, as a grantee, would try to fill it. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's where we caught people on some things. Just be quiet, answer the question, and be done. So those are some of the tips that you'll get from us when you get a review. Not that we're saying you're doing something wrong, but you're opening the door. The more you talk, the more doors you're going to open for somebody to walk through. So you want this review to be quick and go as painless as possible. But also, as a Fed, we do too. But if you say something, we got to go and it's questionable. We have a responsibility to the American taxpayer to go look at it. So just you got to balance that. Just answer the question that they ask and be done. Ongoing technical assistance, we can help with that as well. Doing some trainings on site, remotely. We can do all kinds of different things to get you ready and confident that you will be all right during a review. Next slide. Our next one is going to kind of fall right in line with this. The 10 federal grant mistakes that trigger findings. All right, so we're going to talk about the ones, give some stories. It'll be a fun one of kind of some mistakes people have made that will trigger a finding and how do we prevent those. So hopefully you can join us on June 12th for that. I will be going to Guam in Commonwealth and Northern Mariana Islands 4 days after that. I'll be taking a team out there. We'll be doing some work out there. So you'll see us right before we go to the beach and get a good tan. Anyways, any questions that you all have before we let you go? Any questions? Throw them in the chat if you have any. And appreciate you all for joining us.
And